response to COP's demand for funds to be deposited in advance to defray operational costs, and what the Iranians were told were purchases on the arms market, a total of $41 million has been deposited. What does that refer to?
I don't know. I would guess that may refer to money deposited in the Israeli account. But I don't know. At this point in time, I can't recall what that means.
Down toward the bottom of the page, at the end of the last full paragraph on the page, are the words, "All dollars are now under our control." What did you mean by that?
I don't know. Maybe if I read the whole thing, I can make sense of it. I haven't seen this in at least a couple of years, and I think it might help. Mr. Niels, without, being able to sit down and review all that was happening at that point in time, I can't tell for sure. All I can think of is that all the dollars were now under the control of perhaps the U.S. and Israel. I'm not sure. But without sitting down and going through all of which transpired in that particular period of time, and maybe what happened just before it, I cannot tell you more specifically than that.
Do you recall that there was a time when some $41 million was in fact paid into Israeli accounts?
I know there were periods of time in which a lot of money, they told me and others told me, and what we read in sensitive intelligence. And I must admit to you that there were a number of times when we had considerable questions, the analysts and I, looking at what these things meant in terms of how much money various people were making on the arrangement. I do not recall this specific one. I suggested early on when we first had a dialogue on this that it would be helpful to get the original sensitive intelligence, and as yet we still don't have that. What exactly I am referring to there under all dollars are now under our control, I just cannot recall. Well, I don't believe it necessarily means that all $41 million that we had seen perhaps in sensitive intelligence was in a U.S. account. I don't believe that that ever hit a U.S. covert account of any kind.
Okay, I'd like to switch to the topic of what precisely it was that was being moved from Israel to Iran. I take it was Hawk missiles.
Yes.
And what was the original quantity? Was there a time when the proposal was to ship 600 Hawk missiles to Iran?
I don't know what the original arrangement was. I mean, and I want to go, I'm not relying on sensitive intelligence because I can't remember it, but we saw a number of proposals being made in the time frame late September, early October, all the way through October and into November. A number of proposals having been advanced by the Israelis with the Iranian. And there were, I think, the final number that I remember that we had some control over was 120, and that may even be high. It might have been as low as 80. But I don't recall us agreeing to something as high as that. But again, I may have my memory refreshed.
Let's take the 120. Were these hawks that were already in Israeli stocks?
It was my understanding, again, having been thrown into this on the night of November 17th, was my understanding that everything at that point in time was coming from Israeli stocks.
Was it your understanding that any of those stocks had very recently been supplied by the United States?
I don't recall that that was ever discussed.
Were you aware of any relatively contemporaneous shipments of Hawk missiles from the United States to Israel?
I don't think so. I mean, you may refresh my memory again, but I do not know at this point in time that I knew that. No.
I think you've testified that there were operational problems with this shipment. And I take it one of the operational problems was that there was difficulty in obtaining landing rights in the European country.
Yes.
And that was one of the reasons that Mr. Secord was sent to the European country.
That's correct.
And I take it that the problem of obtaining those landing rights turned into a diplomatic problem, among others.
It did.
And two things were done by you in order to help solve that. One of them was to contact Mr. McFarland.
That's right.
And you asked him to make a call to the foreign minister of the European country.
I don't know that it was necessarily the foreign minister. It might have been another official, but I did ask him to be in touch with an official of that foreign country, yes.
And the other thing that you did was to involve officials at the CIA.
I think we did use communications support from the CIA. That's correct.
Well, you, in fact, you contacted Mr. Claridge, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And, in fact, you went out to the CIA and spent virtually all the day Saturday there.
What was that date?
I believe it's the 23rd. You might want to check Exhibit 46.
That is correct.
You spent most of the day on the 23rd at the CIA.
Yes.
And that was with Mr. Claridge.
I'm sure that it was with Mr. Claridge, perhaps others, but he certainly did clear me in because his signature's right there.
And indeed, you returned to the CIA the following day.
On Sunday? Take your word for it. I did.
And you're now looking at the second page of Exhibit 46, which I take it is another sign-in sheet at the CIA for Sunday.
That's correct.
And Mr. Claridge and you were in touch with the embassy, the U.S. embassy in the European country.
I don't recall specifically talking to the embassy, no. I know that there were discussions that were held, and I know that there was message traffic exchanged. That's correct.
Cable traffic.
Yes.
And the purpose of the cable traffic was to try to obtain from the officials in the European country the rights to land a plane carrying the missiles.
That is correct.
And they were then going to be taken off that plane and loaded onto other planes to be transported on to Iran.
Yes.
And at some point through Mr. McFarland, you heard that the foreign country was going to permit the plane to land.
As I recall, that was at one point approved.
But there was a problem because there was a condition. Isn't that true? Isn't it true that the foreign country...
There was a condition. I don't remember what it was right now.
Isn't it true that the foreign country wanted us to acknowledge in writing
Yes.
what it was that was landing?
That's right.
The actual materiel.
Yes.
The Hawks.
Right.
And we weren't willing to do that.
Not at all.
Now, did you discuss that with Mr. Claridge?